right. So, thank you, Antoinette, for joining me today.
Okay, let's
Okay,
act like we got some sense.
so I just want to lay down some like expectations of like what you want to gain from this meeting as a part of like my feminist praxis. I want to make sure that we know that this is our space. I know that I'm facilitating some of the questions, but I encourage you to facilitate some questions if you have any or add any perspectives or just change the trajectory of the meeting at any point.
Okay.
So, yeah, what are your expectations for this meeting? What are you hoping to get out of this conversation?
Well, um, wait, wait. I don't know what I'm supposed to say.
You say whatever you feel. Do
Wait,
you
what
know
is
what
this
this
interview?
do you know what this interview is about? Did I ever tell you?
No.
Well, this interview is supposed to be about like examining labor. And so I picked you. I thought you were the perfect person um, to examine like intersectional labor, what that looks like because of your job at Michael Kors, and also because you labor in many other things as far as like music and your own fashion and your own um, social activism work that you do and branding yourself on social media. You pretty much do it all. And so you have like various aspects of labor that you're involved in. And I just thought you'd be a good person to talk to. So that's what that's about. Now, knowing that, do you have any expectations or what do you want to gain from this? Or
From this conversation, most likely probably just to give uh, a perspective that's probably in some way, form, or fashion unheard of or
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
not thought of before, spoken from my mouth. Otherwise, it would become unnecessary to this conversation. Um, but yeah, to like give an authentic perspective to this particular um, conversation that can't be acquired without me. That sounds very egotistical, but ultimately, I just want to give perspective.
Right. Yeah, it definitely can't happen without you. So I'm glad you said that. Like, I mean, of course, I love you and stuff. So I was probably gonna pick you anyway, even if you just like did nothing. I would have, well, did nothing, whatever that means. But like, even if you weren't like
Even if I was
employed, hmm?
okay, even if I was a house husband,
Well, not that's still a job. But like, even if you were just like,
a
you
husband,
just like, I'm just coasting through life. I'm just letting life carry me wherever it carries me.
I love
Um,
that.
but like, I would have chosen you anyway. But I think I kind of want to focus on like all these aspects and all these intersecting
Yes.
identities that you have. And one of the things that I was thinking about when I was like trying to formulate questions and stuff was about like how you felt in the fashion industry as a black mask gender queer person.
Mm,
What
mm.
experiences have been like for you?
Oh wow. Oh. So I feel like as a mass presenting person who is also queer identifying, it's been easier to navigate spaces as it comes to, I would say, the free fashion world. I do work in fashion because I work in luxury fashion, and
Mm-hmm.
I do merchandising for different companies. Um, but I think that eventually I want to start working into the corporate fashion industry. And I
Right.
think that's where it really starts to become about the fashion. I would say what I do right now is more retail inspired. I'm going to refer to that as pre fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that my experience as a mask presenting person, being a queer identifying person, has been it's been easier because of those two.
Right.
I think where I run into issues is being a Black American person.
Mm, mm-hmm.
So I haven't really, to be honest, I haven't really experienced any hardships or any kind of setbacks as a queer identifying person.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, as a mass presenting person, that's never hurt anyone in society. So
Mm-hmm.
I've never experienced any setbacks or any kind of like unique experiences that are kind of notable from any of those. It's mostly as being African American. Um, but I think mostly what I've experienced in the fashion industry is that being a person who looks like and presents as I do, I typically do have to prove a lot more than other people in my same guild who may have less experience, less talent, um, less eloquency than I do.
Right.
Um, that's probably the number one most um, prevalent, consistent experience I have in all of my time working in the retail fashion industry, and also in fashion in general.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think the great thing about working in fashion is it's an industry that's dominated by artists. So queer identities are often celebrated, but also queer identities that look like me are celebrated.
Mm,
When we maneuver spaces around fashion, it's not a lot of trans representation. It's not a lot of um, feminine representation unless you're cisgender female. Um, it's not really celebrative of identities that aren't cisgender or identities that are feminine at all, really.
mm-hmm.
I mean, when you kind of maneuver around places and you see who's at the higher ups, it's most likely not going to be a woman, unfortunately, even though um, women are the largest consumers of fashion entirely. And when you look at when you look at consumerism based on who's coming in and shopping and who's actually physically presenting themselves in stores, it's mostly women, even when it's male merchandising.
Mm,
Um, or even when it's male merchandise, it's typically the women who are moving the merchandise, buying for their husbands, their sons, all of these things. And they also make up most of the representation for fashion. So we see it as a female-driven and female-dominated industry, but it's unfortunately not. So
right.
I actually think I have a lot of privilege as a male presenting, mass presenting person
Right.
in this industry, and that's entirely not just retail and fashion as well.
Right. Right. I really appreciate that answer. And I feel like one thing you kind of touched on is like the customer base of
Yeah.
folks coming in and buying stuff. And I know that like a lot of times when we think of privilege, when we think about our um how we're situated in our work and how we're situated in this like capitalistic ladder, we think of employees and executive boards and stuff, and sometimes we forget about the consumers
Mm,
because consumers are they do hold a certain amount of privilege. They can hold a certain amount of privilege, and I'm
yeah.
wondering if you have ever experienced or what has been your experience like with consumers when you meet with them face to face.
Consumers actually, what people don't realize about this is when you kind of realize this, as a person who wants to work in fashion, as a person who wants to work in art in general,
Right.
um, when you realize that ultimately nothing but the customer of your product matters,
Mm-hmm.
you can accomplish anything in fashion. And I got into fashion because of the aesthetics, and I got into fashion because, not only did it seem like an awesome lifestyle, which everybody aspires to, um, and a cool thing to do, but it also seemed to be a creative outlet for me.
Right.
When I started actually studying fashion, when I started like working and kind of manifesting my own spaces in fashion and kind of like getting jobs geared towards what I want to do in the fashion industry, I started noticing and kind of very quickly caught on to the fact that it's all consumer based. And your knowledge of how to put an outfit together, your knowledge of how to sew, your knowledge of how to garment care, your knowledge of all of these things ultimately mean nothing if you cannot speak to a customer,
Right.
indirectly or directly. So a lot of people don't actually realize that consumers are actually the only people in the fashion world who actually hold power.
Mm.
And that is why we see the rapid changes of seasonal fashions that we do. So when I started like actually working in these spaces, I really kind of understood that as intimidating as these spaces can be in fashion, as long as you can make best friends with the consumer, and that doesn't matter whether you're in fashion corporate, whether you're in retail, that doesn't matter whether you're, a photo shoot director or you're a stylist or you're a manager of a department store. If you can make friends with your consumer, you can you'll be great in fashion. When I approach a customer, when I approach a consumer, and this is not only as merchandise manager of a luxury fashion retail store. This is also as someone who creates social media campaigns and marketing for um, certain fashion department stores and brands. When I approach a customer, it's always, what can I do for you? Identifying what it is that they need, identifying what it is that they're into, identifying what it is that they expect to get out of their experience with this brand or with whatever store that I'm
Right.
in. And I 8 times out of 10 do that successfully without being triggered, thank God, as a man of color, as a person of color,
Mm.
and as a person of queer identity. I love dogs.
Absolutely not.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm very lucky for that. I often find that whenever I am in a customer based society, I tend to I tend to favor amongst customers, and that's actually how I get ahead in the fashion world.
Right.
So I'm very lucky for that. Now, obviously, what we don't talk about a lot of times is how hard it is for Black Americans to appeal to a consumer base,
Mm.
because nobody wants to consume from Black Americans. They only want to
Mm.
consume the benefits of Black Americans. So it's harder to sell to people when you are African American, and it's harder to gain credibility when it comes to customers when you are African American.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So I have to work 10 times as hard. I have to be 10 times more articulate. I have to know more about the product. And I typically have to work harder in those spaces as an African American person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point about um, the consumer, the idea of like the consumer and,
Yeah.
how, you know, who wants to consume from certain groups of people.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to know more about like some of the barriers that you face. Is that the only barrier you faced, or like,
As it comes to my relationships with consumers.
well, yeah, because I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of folks know that like in spaces where you're a person of
Yeah.
color or
Yes.
marginalized person, it's horrible, but we expect to be
Expect. Yeah.
discriminated by our employer in many cases, right?
Yes.
But what we don't quite expect is for the consumer, whoever that is, students, if you're working,
Yeah.
your teacher or whatever, to
Yeah.
not want to consume whatever products you have to provide or service you have to provide. So I'm wondering, what are
Yep.
some barriers you face with that?
Yeah. I've I've been in a store in which well, my store, the Michael Kors store.
Right.
I've been on the sales floor and I have actually been in this. I was just recently, like last week, in a situation where a lady had come into the store and um, for for because of the simple fact that I do not want for this particular group of people to be generalized. I will not disclose the race of the person or the ethnicity of the person,
I know what it
because
is.
it almost doesn't even matter what the ethnicity is. This
Mm-hmm.
happens across cultures, unfortunately.
I feel you.
But Ali had walked into the store. She was not African American. That's what I will say.
I know.
Um, as we do. She'd walk into the store. I greeted her, asked her twice how she was, asked her if there was anything she was looking specifically for. Did not answer me. That was three separate occasions in which I tried to start conversation. Two weren't even about product. So it's not like I was being transactional. I was actually trying
Right.
to have a genuine connection conversation with her.
Right.
Didn't say anything to me. Um, Goes over and looks at a product, takes the product off the wall that she specifically wants, and hands it to my Asian coworker
Mm-hmm.
and tells her that she wants it. Now, a lot of consumers don't understand the whole idea of how commission works and the fact that, a specific seller gets a specific, uh, reward for being able to sell an item off the sales floor.
Right.
So, she might have just thought, it's fine, whatever, whoever rings you up is just whoever rings you up, right?
Right.
But for me, putting money and reward aside, the fact that she did not acknowledge me and walked past me to my non-black coworker told me a lot.
Right.
Um, and the fact that it's very clear to me that this person has an understanding of how luxury retail works, I think it's very, very, it would be naive of me to say that, oh, maybe she just didn't understand, and maybe she just didn't know, or maybe she just didn't understand that you greeted her and, you were attempting to really, um, guide her through her Michael Kors experience. And, maybe she didn't understand how specific that was to a specific associate. Um,
Right.
but I know for a fact she did because it's not the first time she's been in store. It's not the first time she stocked our product. And, just within me, I get this gut visceral feeling. And I instantaneously know exactly what's happening and why it's happening. And, where her uncomfortability as a consumer lies. And it's definitely with me. And I think it's less to do with the fact that I'm a male, and everything to do with the fact that, I'm a dark and complected male who, doesn't look like her. And maybe, makes her a little less comfortable when it comes to consuming from, you know?
Right. That's sad. And like, I just want to shift gears to talk about like resistance and what how we categorize resistance. And I guess one of the things that I'm thinking of is like, how do you see, your involvement in different areas? So like you're in fashion and fashion design,
Yeah.
right? Music, social activism, um, social media creation. How do you see that as a form of, or an act of resistance?
Mm. To be honest with you, I see it as most of those that you just named are the only profitable forms of resistance. And thank God we live in a country where we can actually be paid for our activism,
Right.
um, by using social media platforms, by using art to express ourselves, and as a form of protest, and actually, because we live in a capitalistic society, benefit from that. Um, when it comes to my specific forms of art, I see them as resistance specifically because I choose for my forms of art not to, when it comes to fashion for me, when it comes to music, um, when it comes to creating, these marketable online social spaces, I purposely choose not to be silent about, um, my stance on what's going on around me in society.
Right.
Um, I actually, and when I say these things, I never want a cookie. I think should be normalized. I think this is what we all should be doing.
Uh-huh.
But I actually run an Instagram page for my Michael Kors store in San Francisco. And before me, that hadn't been done for my specific location. So I'm actually someone who kind of pioneered a social space for Michael Kors as it's traditionally been physically retail.
Right.
Um, so of course, me being of the new millennia, ushering in, hey, maybe we can actually produce great commerciality by creating an Instagram page, and we have, and we've actually gotten a good following. When designing concepts for the page, I specifically chose to have the first model that's introduced to the page, the first face that people see when they go onto our Michael Kors page for the San Francisco location, which is a flagship store. I wanted it to be an Asian face. And I used an Asian model specifically in all of the pictures.
Uh-huh.
Because one, she was one of the only sales associate women of color at the store. And two, because I felt it was very prominent for the time being, especially
Right.
considering that we are, especially Asian Americans, are experiencing um, physical forms of oppression and physical results of oppressive mindsets right now, especially in San Francisco. And I wanted people to not have the option of logging onto Instagram and consuming Michael Kors products without having to see an Asian face.
Oh, no, that's right.
Um, and that's one example, in my designing, I design do-rags. I design do-rags, and I'm probably one of the only designers who actually wants to be famous for designing do-rags
Uh-huh.
because it is a form of cultural protest.
Uh-huh.
I think do-rags are actually the single-handed most iconic pieces of fashion that America has ever produced.
Right.
It is one of the only genuine pieces of American fashion
Right.
that was not stolen from somewhere. And I will continue to make that my legacy as a human being because my culture as an African American specifically
Uh-huh.
is very important to me. And that's one of the ways that, I see my art as a form of protest. I feel like we all, and it doesn't matter what we do,
Uh-huh.
whether we work at a DMV or whether we are artists, we all have a choice to resist and use our platforms as a form, as to use our jobs or our passions as a platform to cause and create change, or at the very least, cause and create conversations.
Right. Right. Exactly. And I 100% agree. And you did this in your two music projects
Yeah.
too as well. And that's like a
Yes.
blatant form of
Yes.
resistance. But
Yes.
I feel like
Sometimes I forget about that, to be honest.
yeah, you do a lot. That's why
I
I get it.
do. I
So
do.
like I guess how have you incorporated because in both black and urban you have
Hmm.
some powerful messages.
First of all, let's talk about the fact the titles of the album are Black and Urban. It's weird hearing this from another person because it allows me to see my art as it doesn't come from me. So it allows me to like out of body experience another artist for like the first time. And hearing that their first two projects were called Black and Urban. Wow.
Yeah, that's you. That's all you.
That's interesting. Okay.
And so
Sorry,
I'm
go ahead.
wondering, no. And I'm wondering, like, how has your work with creating music structured your thinking, or has it
Mm,
structured your thinking in um, what labor is, your relationship to work is? Because I know you worked really hard to produce, write, perform, engineer all of these
yeah.
records, and even the art that goes
Mm.
with it and the visuals. And so I'm wondering, like, how has that experience um, made you rethink your relationship to labor?
So I actually want to. I know you're my friend, and I understand how intelligent you are, but I definitely want to commend you for that very intellectual question.
Yeah.
It's a very good and very intelligent question
Thank you.
that yeah, a lot of people probably wouldn't even think to articulate. I feel like as it comes to music, I was kind of, I guess it's definitely spiritual. I guess, we're born with talents and we're born with like the ability to pick out concepts that speak to our spirit. So I wrote my first song at the age of 5, and at that time I actually didn't know that songs were professionally written. I actually thought that they were freestyled.
Right.
So I honestly did not know that I was doing something that was actually a thing.
Right.
It just felt natural to me. And that comes with producing as well. That comes with like conceptualizing music. I've been doing that in my head since I was probably old enough to actually comprehend art at all.
Right.
So when I started doing that for myself, it was very natural. It almost didn't even feel foreign, or it didn't feel new to me at all.
Right.
And I think that that mindset comes from me understanding intrinsically things that I'm passionate about. No one has to explain to me how music works. No one really has to explain to me how, a lot of different forms of art that I'm passionate about works, because I think that I just grasp the concept because it's my calling.
Right.
I think in terms of labor, I don't think that my relationship with music has informed or shaped my
Mm.
idea of labor.
Mm.
What I do think is that it mirrors my labor life
Wow.
in
Okay.
a sense that typically when it comes to my jobs, and this has been all inclusive, and I worked in multiple industries, food service, um, of course, retail, all encompassing. I've been an employee who is very well rounded and can do everything, um, and understands, and like I said, intrinsically grasps systems. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that, one, that's how I was raised, and two, um, to not understand and grasp systems, to only do one or two things, or to not be well rounded and all encompassing as an employee is not part of my luxury as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I had to get really good at being able to do everything, because essentially, if you cannot do everything as a black sales associate or employee at all, you are essentially unnecessary and they will
Right.
replace you.
Right.
Um, so it mirrors my music life in a sense that I do write and I do make the beats. I do layer like I do obviously I do everything for my music, and it's the same at work. I have that same spirit. But I think one is chosen, and I
Mm-hmm.
choose to do music. I choose to grasp those concepts because they feed into my soul, and then the other is it's a necessity. If I want to be successful in the industry.
Right. Right. And I guess that's that whole capitalist
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
mentality that I really hate. It's like, on one hand, sometimes you can be successful from um, you can be successful from following your passions
Yes.
and you pay your bills and this is your way of life. And then it's like on the other hand, sometimes it doesn't work out for folks. And so it's like you
Hmm.
have to do this thing that you don't want to do in order to live. And
For
it's
80% of Americans.
yeah, it's limiting. And I know this is all like common knowledge, but this is
Yeah.
just it's sad just reflecting on it. And
Yeah, when you actually stop and think about it.
right, and how sometimes we have to view like yeah, I feel like a lot of people don't view the actual labor of creating music as equal to
Mm.
labor that is compensated.
Mm.
And people say things
Wow, yeah.
well, yeah, well, I hear arguments like that about motherhood, right? Motherhood, parenthood, whatever. People are like, yeah, people don't get compensated. That's still true. Like, parents don't get as much recognition as they should
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's labor as well. But it's like,
Mothers specifically.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
mothers. But it's like at the same time, why can't me reading a book, writing a book, enjoying my life, why is that not a form of labor? Why does labor necessarily have to be negative? And why does it have to be compensated?
Yeah.
So I just kind of think of
Yeah.
that. Like,
I love that.
right, it's just, it doesn't
I
make
love
sense to
that.
me. It doesn't make much sense to me. Um,
Yeah,
but
I love
yeah,
that.
I think, um, I think I have one last question.
Okay.
And so that's like, we hit on it a little bit, but how have you um, incorporated your situational knowledge into your field? So everything that you came with, how have you poured that out into, compensated field? But secondly, all the other fields that you have, your entrepreneurship, your own social media page, and all the ventures that you're doing, your music and so forth, acting as
we
well.
okay. We talked about situational knowledge earlier, me and you personally. But I do want to clarify. You do mean situational knowledge as things that you have to acquire in order to, you know, maneuver around the spaces
Right.
that you are put in. Okay, I know exactly what you mean. Well, as most practice, because I do work, 30, 40 hours a week,
Hmm.
that's where I do spend a lot more of my time. I'll start with my work and passion. Um, the thing about passion is there's no spaces for people to incorporate out loud their situational knowledge. There's no spaces for a woman to be like, um, I totally understand that we all have sales goals and I appreciate that. Um, and that's definitely not going to stop me from, my my situation and predicament in society is not going to stop me from succeeding. However, it does become difficult to navigate a sales floor with men on the sales floor because I often am put in predicaments where I'm uncomfortable.
Hmm.
There's no space for women to say that because your manager is going to basically tell you to suck it up, unfortunately,
Right.
because we live in a capitalist society that teaches you essentially that you have to sell whatever you can. And if it is your body, if it is your time, if it is your smile that gets those bags out of the door, then use it,
Yeah.
even if it's triggering, even if it's uncomfortable for you, even if it's psychologically damaging to you.
Right.
So we don't really create, and that's honestly that is not just within fashion. That is actually within corporate life entirely. You'll find that working at McDonald's. You'll find that working, in major retail. You'll find that working in other fields that aren't even consumer based. So it's not just with fashion, but with me specifically, it's all about consciously understanding. And I spent a lot of time before I went into my respective field studying um, the world around me. And outside of academics, actually, outside of college, not just college, but actually using my literal eyes to watch the world around me, studying statistics, studying behavioral psychology, and how humans interact all across the nation and all across the world, enough to understand. There's not a room that I can walk in to where I can't calculate the outcome of how I'm going to be treated, of how I'm going to succeed, of what might be up against me, what my strengths will be, what my privileges will be. I am instantaneously aware of that, regardless of any scenario I'm put
Right.
in, especially in this nation.
Right.
And that's all me being cognizant of my surroundings and being able to maneuver um, around to essentially be successful, like every person of color or any marginalized person has to do.
Right.
But there is really no space to outwardly, apply that to your job. You just have to subconsciously apply it to your job. Um, and basically, essentially, you have to, you know, kind of as they say, keep your head down and keep going, to be successful.
Right.
Um, but there's no cathartic level or therapeutic level of release that you get in these industries at all whatsoever. So that's hard. In my music, it literally, I literally write about it. I remember learning to like write songs. It was a little rough for a couple years of my life because I was writing songs that just were not good. Were very cringy, very cheesy, kind of Disney Channel. Okay, but that was the age that I was at the time, and that was what I was surrounded by. So that's what I knew. But as I started to get better as a songwriter, I started realizing that in order to really write good songs, I had to write about what I knew. And
Mm-hmm.
because I hadn't been in love yet, the only thing that I knew that I was very, very passionate about was my experience as a Black American. So instantaneously, I started writing about sociology and psychology and society rather than writing about love because I had not felt love yet at
Right.
that particular time in my life.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Um, and from there, the ball just kept rolling. The ball kept rolling, and I hate. This is my biggest complaint with music, is that every single song that we hear when we turn on the radio is about love.
Right.
But there are so many other things in life to write about,
Right.
and we just don't.
Right.
So that was something that I really, yeah, that I wanted to change for myself. Um, yeah, and I think my situational knowledge has really, it's actually, now that you're forcing me to think about it, it's actually really the forefront of my humanity.
Right.
You know, um, it's probably what I'm most. I think as it comes to academia, it's what I'm probably most well versed in,
Mm.
and well aware of.
Right.
And so I think it actually makes my life a lot easier because I'm able to calculate the endings or the outcome of certain predicaments that I might put myself in. Where others who, may walk in maybe a little more naive to an industry and expect certain things, I don't.
Right.
I don't expect that I'm going to be offered a promotion, even though I'm the most successful selling associate at a company for a year and a half, because I know that's not how it works.
Right.
Other people would come in and be like, well, it's not fair that I've been doing this for you. And, you haven't offered this, but you offered Jimmy over there, who's worked 4 months for the company and doesn't do anything, a promotion. I expect that.
Mm-hmm.
So I know how to interweave my way around that. And when I do complain about something, I know how to make it logistical and not emotional
Mm-hmm.
because people will not listen to your emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another that's another form of situational knowledge you have to have,
Right.
But I think that that really affects my life all around, to be honest.
Right. Right. That's really sad that like
It's really sad.
yeah, I want us to like move forward with like a feminist approach to what logic is because I feel like a lot of these people are um,
Absolutely.
academically intelligent, but they're emotionally unintelligent. Uh,
Yep.
and I feel like both are important. Honestly, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like the former isn't really that important, but I feel like having emotional intelligence is important. And like, I don't know why we try to separate that in like professionalism. It's
Mm-hmm.
just jarring to me. It's weird.
I've noticed that actually I have a particular female coworker that actually happens to be my best friend at our particular store, and she actually she experiences a lot of sexism, and she also experiences a lot of um, obstacles as it comes to moving up with the company. Aside from her being the top performing sales associate, her being extremely well rounded, especially at the young age that she is, and she's not able to move up. And we all know what it is. But unfortunately, because of what you just said and how we prioritize professionality and logistics over emotion,
Mhm.
she can't take the corporate or complaint
Right.
because it's oh, well, you're just too young.
Mhm.
Or have you ever thought that maybe these other employees actually have something that you don't have?
Mhm.
Don't take it personally. It's just business. And the
Right.
thing is we prioritize business and logistics over emotional intelligence. And it's actually what creates and recycles the cycle of abuse in the workplace.
Right. Right. Because they're so
Because you
used.
can't tell someone, oh, I feel like I'm being discriminated against. You have
Right.
to prove on pen and paper, logistically, logically, that you are being discriminated against.
Right. Right.
And these people who do have, you know, um, you know, really good meticulation skills, but not, you know, great emotional calculating skills.
Right.
They get into these positions and they have these positions of power, and they start to almost become a human calculator, and
Mhm.
they lose the ability to feel for the people beneath them,
Mhm.
um, who are probably going through some of the same issues that they went through when they were trying to make it to where they are. Um, but they can't afford to feel for these people because then again, you know, uh, then everybody would be at the top. Everybody would be corporate. Everybody would be district. Everybody would be original. You
Right.
know what I'm saying?
Right. Exactly.
Um, so
Exactly. Yeah. This was a really informative interview, and I'm really excited for some of my more privileged peers to learn something from this. Um, mhm. So that's all from me. Do you have anything that you
wow.
want to add? Any last words that you'd like folks to know?
No, I'm already long-winded as it
Oh, okay. All right. I'll
is.
just plug your
This is
music,
awesome.
something like that. I'll plug your music. But I'm gonna stop recording this.